Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do: to educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons, and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. Welcome to today's show, everyone. And today is an exciting topic for me, but perhaps a confusing topic for many people. So I hope that's not going to be the case, but I've been wanting to do this podcast for a very long time. And let me set it up this way. If you had to think about what is the number one issue that individuals have in the world, what is the thing that makes them struggle, that makes the world worse, that makes people unhappy? What is the mindset or way of being or way of thinking that contributes most to people's dysfunction? Is this a question you've ever thought about? It's a question I think about a lot, questions like this. And I have an answer that I want to propose today. Now, I'll set this up with, some of the next level human work. You may or may not be aware, but I now spend a lot of my time not just doing Jade Teta type stuff, the old metabolism stuff, where you can find information at jadeteta.com. But if you go to jadeteta.com, you'll also see an awful lot of information about next level human. And my work has moved into the next level human realm. You might say, well, what does that actually mean? Well, my expertise is physical transformation. This is where the metabolism stuff comes in, and psychological or personal transformation. I feel like these are kind of, if you're going to sum it up in the easiest way, this is what I do: physical transformation in terms of making people healthier, making people look better, and then personal transformation in terms of changing the way people see themselves, the way they interact with the world, and the way they seek meaning and making a difference. Well, Next Level Human, this podcast, is really all about that. Of course, it covers health and fitness, finance, personal relationships, but purpose and meaning is one of the major elements or the big crux of what Next Level Human is all about. And as part of Next Level Human and this work that I've been doing, I've started doing different live events. I began to teach lots of the Next Level Human work. And my next big project is launching the Human Coaching Certification, which really teaches people the mechanisms, the way of coaching that I have developed over the last decade. And that is all coming soon. But today's podcast, this question of what makes people worse off, dysfunctional, disconnected, lonely, what makes the world more combative and less communicative and collaborative, that's what I want to get into. And this is kind of covered in my live event called The Awakening. And The Awakening is a live event where we use actual psychedelic compounds, one or more of the following: ayahuasca, psilocybin from magic mushroom, ketamine, kanna, which is more of a psycholytic versus a psychedelic, but kanna, which is an herb, and then LSD and mescaline and these kinds of things. And part of what we are trying to do speaks to the podcast today. Part of what I am trying to do, part of what we are trying to awaken people to, is this idea that the way that they interact with the world is where a lot of the dysfunction and difficulty comes from in the world, which goes to this question I just asked you. And the answer I'm going to propose that really, if we got beyond this, we would be able to look at life an entirely different way and awaken to new possibilities for ourselves and new possibilities for the world. Now, what is this? Well, this way of thinking is so pervasive that when I first tell you, you're going to be a little bit confused about what I'm actually talking about. And it is this idea of duality or binaries. The fact that we humans constantly think in dualistic terms. There's the mind and the body, right? That's dualism. There's hot, there's cold. That's a binary. There's up, there's down. There's male, there's female, right? We think in binaries and dualistic ways in every single thing that we do, right and wrong. Now imagine if all of a sudden we were able to get past this binary way of thinking, this dualistic way of thinking, this extreme right and extreme left way of thinking. What would happen? Well, part of this non-dual way of thinking actually comes from the philosophy of Taoism. And of course, the famous Tao symbol is of the yin and yang, these, quote, two fish, one white, one black. The white one having a black dot as the eye and the black one having a white dot as the eye. And if you look at these two fish, it almost seems like they're consuming each other, right? One fish, it looks like it is at the tail end of the other fish. So the black fish is trying to eat the white fish's tail, and the white fish is trying to eat the black fish's tail. And what I love about the yin-yang symbol is it tells you right away whether you're a dualistic thinker, a binary thinker, or whether you are beginning to move into a non-dualistic way or a non-binary way or a nuanced way of seeing the world. For example, if you were to look at the Tao symbol right now, what would you see? Would you see a white fish and a black fish trying to consume each other? Well, if you saw things that way, it definitely says not only are you a dualistic thinker, but you also have another bias built in, which is that life is about, competition, right? Or you might see, well, no, you have the black and the white and they're complementary. So you're still thinking dualistically, but you are thinking more collaboratively. But what if you saw it as the fact that if the white fish actually was able to consume the black fish, the white fish, yes, killed off the black fish, so to speak, but it also killed itself off because now there's no fish. There's no distinction between that individual white fish versus that individual black fish. Or if the black fish was able to consume the white fish, then the whole symbol would be black. It would lose its meaning and the black fish would cease to exist. Part of what this is pushing to is some of this next level human work that by seeing yourself as separate from other people and distinct from other people, and then trying to be competitive or exude power over other people or become more popular than other people to set yourself apart, what you're actually doing is you're actually to some degree destroying yourself in this dualistic way of thinking, because we humans cannot exist except in relation to other people. Think about your identity, right? Like for me, yes, I'm Jade, but what all goes into Jade? Well, I've got a mother and a father. They're both still alive that raised me. I've got 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. I've got a history, most of it with other people. So I am Jade in relation to other people. If other people cease to exist, to some very real extent, I would cease to be Jade. Now, take that even further. What if there were no animals, no plants, no nothing, no earth? Does Jade even exist unless in relation to these other things? Well, he doesn't, and neither do you. In the same way, the Taoist fish, the white fish and the black fish, will cease to exist if one consumes the other. If the black fish wins and beats the white fish, then the whole symbol ceases to exist at all, and the black fish is annihilated as well. I'm sorry to break into the show, but I wanted to take a second to cover one of our sponsors and tell you all about Paleo Valley at paleovalley.com. These are the grass-fed sticks that I tell you all so much about that all of my friends know I have on hand constantly. They are in my car. They are at my house. I keep them at my sister's home and my parents' house. I have these things everywhere because they are the simplest, most convenient whole foods protein supplement you can get. Almost like carrying around pure protein, low carb protein in your pocket. They also, these Paleo Valley beef sticks are the only 100% grass-fed and grass-finished beef sticks on the market. They use organic spices. They are naturally fermented instead of using nitrates and nitrites that can be a problem in some of these cured meats. And they simply taste fantastic. Check out the original or the jalapeno. Those are my favorites. Please make sure you go over to paleovalley.com and visit. When checking out, use the code NEXTLEVEL for a 15% discount. Remember, our sponsors keep the show going by you giving them your patronage and spending your money on these high quality products. You actually do a few things. One, you're helping to support the podcast. And two, you are helping your health. And three, you are making sure that good quality companies like Paleo Valley can be out there doing their business, changing the world, making the earth better. One of the things you may not know about this is that grass-fed organic and grass-finished beef is doing something that is so utterly important for our environment, actually helping to repopulate the topsoil. A lot of people don't know this, but our topsoil is being extremely depleted. And raising animals, especially cattle, the correct way helps to get that topsoil back. This is one of the reasons why I love Paleo Valley. Not to mention it tastes fantastic, but they're one of these companies, like my other sponsors, Cured Nutrition and Organifi, that are doing the right things by the environment. I really appreciate everything they do, and I hope you will check them out. Thanks so much. paleovalley.com. Use the code NEXTLEVEL. And now, back to the show. This is what dualistic thinking does. This need to always have up, down, right, left, extremes, hot, cold, male, female, right, wrong. All of these things, this way of thinking sets you up to not understand that there is no such thing really as a sunset and a sunrise. Think about this for a minute, right? So yes, we can say in order to make sense of the world that the sun sets and the sun rises, but when exactly at dawn does it cease to be black and start to become light? When exactly at dusk does it cease to be light and start to become black? We know that there is no switch, like a light switch where it's 1 minute it's on and 1 minute it's off. We know that it's a gray, it's a nuance, it's a process. And so when you look at the Taoist symbol of yin yang, a non-dual thinker will be most interested in the relationship between the two fish, the fact that neither exists without the other. In fact, you can't even see the black fish unless the white fish is there, and vice versa. And that the line that snakes between those two fish, that area that makes the distinction where white stops to being white and black stops being black, that area, that's the most important area for a non-dualistic thinker. Someone who sees in grays, someone who sees in nuance, someone who sees in, this idea of process, that perhaps there is no right or wrong way. Perhaps there is no necessarily distinction between you and me, that these distinctions are very subtle. And when you look at these subtleties and when you look at the relationship between things and how they relate in a way that is complementary versus relate in a way that is different, you start to uncover something and you start to think in a very different way. And this goes further into some of the Taoist philosophy. Many people would say the Taoist philosophy in general is a non-dual philosophy or a non-binary philosophy. In other words, there's not God and man or spirit and body. There's just the Tao, consciousness. And everything from trees to buildings to humans are essentially extensions of this consciousness. Some having a little bit more ability to reflect on themselves, like humans can, versus animals, versus plants, versus inanimate objects, but that it's all just consciousness or mind or Tao, that we are essentially fish swimming in water made of water. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but let's cover it with an old sort of wives' tale that you may have heard. The old proverb goes like this: two fish are swimming on their way to work in the morning, having a conversation, and an older fish swims by and says, "How's the water, boys? Top of the morning to you." And the two fish look at each other as the old fish goes by and they go, "What the hell is water?" In other words, you don't know oftentimes what you don't know. In other words, water was such a part of the fish's life that they didn't actually know that they were swimming in water. And how would they know? Because there's no contrast. Unless they had ever been on land, they could never know what water is, right? And this is this idea of dualism, and thinking in dualistic ways certainly can inform us about life. However, when we live and stay in that, we miss something. In other words, we understand water because we understand land. We understand land because we understand water. This does not mean that land and water need to be in competition with one another. In fact, in a very real sense, they are, in a sense, continuous together and require each other to understand them. These two fish can't understand water unless they can understand land. And in this way, water and land are intimately linked, not opposites, but complementaries, right? Kind of like work and rest, right? Can you actually work hard without resting, right? You might see it as like, well, they're opposites. They're not. They're synergists. And many things are like this. And in the Taoist philosophy, the idea here is that everything is connected, and the dualistic nature of the world simply allows us to understand how everything is connected. Instead of creating this dualistic way of right, wrong, left, right, up, down, hot, cold, etc., and looking at it as opposites and looking at it as competition, we should be seeing these things as ways that we understand the world in a complementary way. And you cannot understand the world without these nuances. But as soon as we take these nuances and turn them into hardcore right and wrong dualities, we end up creating issues for ourselves. And we buy into the illusion that we are all separate and not the same. And so the whole point of this philosophical thought experiment regarding duality and non-duality is to help us understand how we're seeing the world. And this shows up as humans as judgment, how we judge the world. The idea of the awakening in ourselves, to me, is the idea that you wake up to this, sort of understanding that you are connected to everything else. And by virtue of that connection, that's how you become you. However, if you judge other things, look at the differences between you and other people, focus on all the bad aspects in a very dualistic way, and fall into this competitive binary way of thinking, not only do you harm others, but you harm yourself, because you are not separate from and cannot be defined unless you are in relation to other people. Isn't it so? And so the idea then becomes, when you are judging others, you are judging yourself in a sense. And this goes to this principle of the way you behave out in the world is the way you actually see the world. If you think the world is a place of danger and a place of uncertainty and a place where you have to fight to get what you want, then you will show up that way. And to me, that's a dualistic way of thinking. Wars come out of dualism, don't they? My country is better than your country, and your country is taking more of the resources from my country, and this land is mine and that land is yours. Can you see that everywhere you go, the extremes in dualism are what cause the problems and the heartache? I want to jump in real quick and tell you about one of my favorite new products. And to start out, I want to ask you a question. If you had to follow your friends around who are not the healthiest in the world and see what they are doing, what would be the number one thing you would probably tell them to do to start? For most people, that's going to be drinking more water, right? This is something that we talk about all the time in health and fitness. It's almost as if we think of it as an afterthought now, because obviously water is so crucial. However, we oftentimes get this wrong. For example, did you know that when it comes to hydration, just drinking water can make things worse? Most people don't know this. Why? Partly because most people are over drinking water and under consuming the electrolytes that help water do its job. What we don't realize is that hydration is not just about water. It's about electrolytes, the minerals in there, as well as getting that water into the cells. And so you do not want to be over consuming water if you're not getting your electrolytes right. And this opens up a whole new discussion because most people are not getting their electrolytes right. For example, did you know that too low sodium is an issue? Just as much, if not more so, than high sodium. In other words, what we want if we're going to get the right electrolytes is to get the right amount of sodium and potassium and magnesium in the Goldilocks zone. We don't want too much. We don't want too little. We want it just right. This opens up a whole other thing here too, because people who are exercising, doing sauna therapies, doing low carb diets are disrupting and losing lots and lots of their electrolytes. For example, when insulin is not around in low carb diets, you will excrete lots of sodium. In other words, under that state, exercising, low carb diets, all these things, you actually need more sodium. And so if you're somebody who has been just drinking water, not paying attention to electrolytes, and also feeling fatigued, feeling like you're underperforming, not sleeping right, getting cramps, twitches, headaches, any of these things, then you are probably dealing with an electrolyte issue. This is where the product LMNT comes in. This product has been a game changer for me and many, many of my patients and clients. This is a rehydration electrolyte beverage, basically. It is a powder of electrolytes formulated with 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams magnesium without the added sugar and other nonsense that comes in beverages like Gatorade. This stuff is basically a rehydration beverage on steroids. It is the thing that is going to replenish your electrolytes in the right ratios, decrease fatigue, really correct chronic dehydration. And by the way, many people are dehydrating themselves, becoming hyponatremic, low sodium, when they're consuming too much water. You need your electrolytes on board, especially if you are someone who is losing lots of sodium and other electrolytes through low carb diets and lots of exercise. This is where LMNT comes in. LMNT is a new sponsor to the Next Level Human podcast. I cannot recommend this product enough. I have been using this stuff for months now, and I have immediately seen changes in my energy levels. I feel like I'm operating on a whole other level, and I have seen this as being the primary thing that people who have been using LMNT have been telling me, that their fatigue is getting better, especially fatigue that comes after very intense workouts that involve lots of sweating and lots of intense output from the nervous system. Please check out Element. Use the code NEXTLEVEL. DrinkElement.com. That's DrinkLMNT.com. DrinkElement.com. And let's get back to the show. And so the idea of waking up then is understanding that the world acts in a non-dualistic way. We are not separate from each other. We are all connected. Not only are we all connected, but we are connected to the rest of the world. And that the differences between up, down, right, left, top, bottom, hot, cold, male, female, these differences are simply representing synergy, representing the ways that non-dualism manifests in multiple forms, in a process, in a continuum. In other words, it's not the white fish and the black fish in the Tao symbol. It's the line that snakes between. It's the fact that you can't even see the black fish without the white fish, nor the white fish without the black fish. And this is a very different way of seeing the world. It's a non-dualistic, non-binary way. And this shows up in many things, doesn't it? It certainly shows up in all the isms, racism, healthism, sexism, right? It even shows up in this idea of binaries in gender that we're struggling with in the culture right now. A non-dualistic thinker doesn't really have a problem with this. So they go, okay, so there's male, there's female, and there's intersex. That makes sense. There's black, there's white, and there's gray. There's night, there's day, and there's dawn, and there's dusk, right? In other words, a non-dualistic binary thinker doesn't have a problem with nuance, doesn't have a problem with new categories because they realize the categories are infinite anyway. And they're most interested in how differences are actually synergists. How do you turn work and rest into synergy? You can't have one without the other. We can't know night without day. We all understand this, but what we don't necessarily understand is that when our thinking is habitually dualistic, we create separation for ourselves, loneliness for ourselves, competitiveness in the world without even trying. And the whole point of this podcast is just to get you into an introduction of non-binary, non-dualistic thinking. And when this happens, the contention is, and a lot of what is taught in Next Level Human Work and in the Awakening event, is to help you have a felt sense of this connection rather than this competitiveness, to have a felt sense of what it's like to be a non-binary thinker, a non-dualistic thinker, right? That's what we're really talking about here. And it can be incredibly powerful. Imagine if you had no judgment, competitive judgment around people who were different than you, but instead saw those differences as synergies, as different parts of a whole in which you are both part of. And this starts to become reminiscent of lots of Eastern philosophies because Taoism, of course, permeates an awful lot of Buddhism. In fact, Buddhism came out of Taoism. So you'll see this a lot in the Eastern philosophies. And you'll even see some of it in some of the Western philosophies and even religions. Part of the concept of, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit in Christianity is this idea that, yes, we can separate particular parts of spirit, but it's still just one spirit. This Trinity, right, represents a whole, yet it's also three parts. Now, we can get caught up in the distinction between the three parts, or we can get caught up in the synergy of the three parts. Which you get caught up in is going to determine to a large degree how much you really understand yourself in relation to everything else, and your ability to think in a way that is lateral and flexible and nuanced and gray. In other words, what you'll find is binary dualistic thinkers aren't really able to think outside of the box. So we always hear this idea of think outside of the box. And the assumption there is that, I never got in the box in the first place. The box is bad and outside of the box is good. Or, the box is good and outside of the box is bad. A dualistic thinker would say, no, you need to understand the box to understand what's outside of the box. And you need to understand what's outside of the box to understand the box. And the two together is where the greatest understanding comes from, right? That's the idea of being a non-dual thinker. Now, when we wake up to this, what it begins to do is it begins to primarily help us understand how we relate to our pain, how we relate to our wounds, how we relate to our journey on the planet as humans. We probably see our pain, our suffering, our wounds, our trials, our tribulations as being good, and all the great things that have happened to us, as being bad, our trials, tribulations, and all that as being bad, something to avoid, and all the other things, all the good things, happy moments as being good. What we don't always understand is that sometimes the most painful moments bring out the best in us. Think about it. Can't we all think of a time that we have dealt with difficulty, and having gone through that difficulty, which was, quote, bad in a dualistic binary way of thinking, turned into the best thing that ever happened to us? Haven't we also been in situations where we thought it was the best thing ever, and it turned out to be one of the worst things ever? In other words, if you think in binary terms, in dualistic terms, you won't understand even how to process things as a human, right? You hear every time you listen to this podcast, it's all about learning, teaching, and loving. However, if you operate from a dualistic binary way of looking at the world, you'll have a hard time understanding what that even means. Your pain, your trials, your tribulations, all of that can be seen as something to avoid, to not look at, or that can be seen as a potential for growth. A non-dual thinker, a non-binary thinker, doesn't look at this as black and white. It goes, I can grow from this. It sees the nuance, the subtleties, the fact that our pain can become a path to purpose. Our suffering can become a source of meaning. Our hurt can be a way to help. Now, a more dualistic person wouldn't look at it that way at all and couldn't get outside of the box to even see the box, couldn't get outside of the water to even realize that they were in water. And this is how devastating and destructive binary dualistic thinking is. So the idea is, can you begin to think in non-dualistic terms, non-binary terms? Can you begin to see the subtleties and the synergies between things? Can you begin to see that they may seem like opposites, but they're actually the same? They're reliant on each other. This is non-dual thinking. This is non-binary thinking. And when you begin to think this way, you begin to see all kinds of lateral connections. You begin to see the forest and the trees, right? You begin to see the entire spider web and the connections, how you touch one part of the web and another part of the web, actually moves. This is where things like functional medicine come from. This is where things where, a non-binary, non-dualistic thinker won't think about alternative medicine and natural medicine versus traditional medicine. They'll think more like functional medicine, the best of both worlds, right? This is how we want to begin to look at things. You'll judge yourself less. You'll judge other people less. You'll actually use all your experiences to try to understand something deeper about the world, to see how you relate to it. The relational aspects of things rather than competitive aspects of things and the differences in things. So this podcast is really an opening for you to begin to trust and observe and be in communion with things that are different, that they're not bad, that they're not necessarily good, that they are simply a way of understanding both parts. Again, you can't understand the water without the land. These fish are clueless without land, right? But the older fish knows something because he's a non-binary, non-dualistic thinker, right? This is the way we want to begin to look at things in the next level human way of doing this. So let me give you a few exercises to begin looking at this. These things could be tough, but rather than the next time you see this can happen in regular types of things, I do a lot of contrast hydrotherapy. And one of the things I do is when I go from hot to cold, and you can do this too, if you ever do any of these things, when I go from hot to cold, I think about what is similar about them and what I need to understand and what each are trying to teach me. So it's really interesting going from hot sauna to cold, right? Both burn to some degree, but it's a different type of burn. One stimulates you in the beginning and then relaxes you. The other relaxes you in the beginning and then stimulates you. Now, when you start to look at these two things as complementary and what do they teach together versus separate, you start to see certain things about them. That hot and cold therapy together for the body actually pumps blood around. If you just did hot, it would dilate everything. If you just did cold, it would constrict everything. But what's beneficial is the movement of both. You get something perhaps new out of understanding both and not seeing them as competition and opposites, but seeing them as synergists as well. So that's one way you can see and look at this and explore this in your own life. Also, you can do it with exercise. What about rest versus movement? How are they reliant on each other? How does taking more rest in a workout cause you to be able to push harder? How does pushing harder allow more rest? What is the relationship between those in a non-dualistic way? You can do this when, if you're sexually speaking, you're a male versus a female, meaning you have male genitalia versus female genitalia, and you're cis hetero, meaning you give, credence to the binary aspects of male versus female. Maybe you can get a little bit more intersex related when you start to go, no, let me think about what about femininity and female is similar to male. And what about femininity and female actually defines male? And can you actually even have male, female without the other? And what do these things represent? This is how a non-dual thinker would be thinking. And then think about it like this. If you look at the way our world is evolving, you're starting to see, well, it used to be, essentially white individuals, Caucasians, and darker individuals, right? And now what we see is lots of mixed individuals, people who you wouldn't be able to tell. This is non-dual evolution. The fact that we're all just becoming one species, one race, so to speak. This is a very non-dualistic way of seeing it. Same thing happens with gender and sex. Two different things, just in case you're not up on this. Sex is really just talking about anatomical sex. What is your, genitalia, vagina, penis, etc. Versus gender has a cultural construct to it. And these two things you can use as well. Think about where we're evolving. There is now an understanding through the science, a pretty robust science actually, that we really need to start looking at this as male versus female versus intersex. And by the way, these intersex people have been around forever. They've always been on the planet. And we also find this in every single species you look at, from crocodiles to mammals, etc. We're just now talking about it more now. Now, the idea is a dualistic thinker would need to see race as these dichotomies, black versus white. Would also need to see gender as these dichotomies, male versus female. In the same way, they would have to not understand dusk and dawn in relation to night and day. And so what you want to do is you want to think about your resistance to all these ideas. Why do I bring up gender? And why do I bring up race? The reason why is because still in our culture, we have a lot of dualistic binary thinkers in this regard. And if you want to know how dualistic and binary you are, you can see how much you resist some of these ideas. How uncomfortable is it to you that we now have male, female, and intersex versus just male, female? That now we're starting to recognize this gray zone between male, female. How upsetting is it, or how resistant are you to the idea that we don't just have, lighter people and darker people? We now have all shades of people, and we're now becoming more evolved in this way. And my contention is that as we become more non-dualistic, non-binary thinkers, we start to create more connection, less division. We start to understand something about ourselves and others that we didn't understand before. We start being in tune with the principles of the universe of integration, inclusivity, and holism. And that non-dualistic, non-binary thinkers will think this way. They won't need to stick to these hard lines in the sand of, I'm on the right end of the political spectrum, you're on the left end of the political spectrum. I'm lighter skin, you're darker skin, I'm male, you're female, up, down, left, right, back and forth, all of these binary ways of thinking. And so all I wanted to do today, and we're going to end here, is present this idea to you so that you can begin to explore to what degree you are a binary or dualistic thinker. And to what degree can you start being a non-binary, non-dualistic thinker? And to think about how that could change you for the better and your judgments about the world and your fears about the world and the fact that you feel so disconnected or lonely in the world, right? And how it can change other people. My contention is that this way of thinking is going to wake you up to a very different reality, a reality that is going to help you grow, help you enrich others, and help you evolve the world in a right way. And that the world is moving in this direction anyway, that we are collectively beginning to understand this, and that it might be really good to start to question your dualistic binary ways of thinking. All right. Thanks so much for hanging out on the show today, and I will see you next time, everybody. You have been listening to the Next Level Human podcast with Dr. Jade Teta. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe and consider leaving a review. You make the biggest difference when you pass on your lessons and inspire others. That's why reviews like this are so powerful. Your words may be the only ones that resonate for someone else. Please remember the information in this podcast is for educational purposes only. Always consult your personal physician or therapist before making any lifestyle changes. And finally, thank you for who you are in the world and the difference you make.